Hi, my name's Karen and I'll be taking you for the module The Mechanics of Fashion. In this module we're really looking at the nuts and bolts of the fashion industry, and it will form one of two specialist modules which are looking specifically at fashion. So currently about 14 million tonnes of clothes are thrown away in America every year. And to me, this, whilst it's showing that obviously we have great production and technological capacity to produce all these clothes, it's showing that there's something wrong within the system that is producing all this waste. And that's why I think it's important that within a study such as international fashion management, we really get behind the scenes of the fashion industry and look at maybe what is going wrong, but also what's going right. So as I say, it's the nuts and bolts. To contextualise this, I am a practitioner, so I centre many things around my sewing machine. It becomes a place for reflection and thinking about the various different design, manufacture and consumption processes that go into something like fashion, but also the technological capacity. So as we engage with technology, we're getting a greater understanding of the tools and equipment we have around us. Within this module, though, it's also looking at the social environment, so looking at how technology and something like fashion works within a social context. From a managerial aspect, it's looking at the inputs and outputs of that process and that system and seeing how they may be managed, or seeing how they are managed and how they could be managed in the future. The module also touches on economics and enterprise, so a little bit about the sort of market forces the economics, as I say, that goes into something, a vast industry that is very global by nature. But it has, real winners and it has real losers within this system in terms of money and how that money and economics may be spread around. And that, I suppose, then leads into things like political parameters and how they may affect the overall management of either a particular enterprise or the fashion industry as a whole. The module will also hopefully touch on some cultural aspects, so looking at different cultural contexts in which we see fashion. So is it very much, a Western dominated aesthetic and sort of value driven, industry that needs actually more cultural sensitivity to some of the issues? Because fashion is a change maker. It does change, certain environments and situations. And finally, although it's not really finally, because actually sustainability should be at the top of our, of our list really. But it's looking as well, as I say, into, the management of these systems and not just the sustainability to the actual planet, but I suppose as well the sustainability of that particular business model. If I just touch briefly on my background, this was very much about sort of development theory and looking at textile and clothing production. It was coming more from an aspect of looking at issues to do with poverty alleviation, income generation, and looking at the whole gamut of different technologies and processes that people may undertake in both sort of processing fibres and fabrics, but also then cutting and making clothing. It was also very much about this notion of technology transfer, so looking at the different scales of technology. This image here is of a silk reeler in India, and it's a very traditional, low maintenance, low cost, technology, which has been going for years and years and years. As we look deeper into it, though, we can consider, this market for silk and how it's produced, and possibly the need for the development of different technologies which will cater to those different markets. But within this context, it's important that this becomes appropriate, that the technology, is appropriate for the cultural setting, for the economic setting, and the political setting in which it's implemented and diffused. I do love this image because for me this sums up, very much on a small scale and on a very local level, these idea about sort of mechanics of a system. So here we have 3 generations of women, carding fibres, spinning fibres, and then weaving fibres. And so for me, this module is seeking us to explore these different processes. Not necessarily these, but the idea of sort of systems of manufacture within the industry. Something like pattern cutting, again, is very interesting as a technology and as a way of doing things, which has mainly been dominated by, block pattern cutting that we've seen emanating from Western systems. But again, it's how these may change. So taking those very sort of small scale, rural sort of contexts, we're then bringing them back down to the high street and the idea about how clothes are consumed and how they're marketed and they're sort of presented to us. Something like fast fashion has had a major impact on on clothing and the clothing industry, and we need to look at this practice as a way of evaluating its benefits and also its massive downfalls in terms of very cheap fashion and being widely accessible. Again, this idea of scale, we can look at something like manufacture, and there was a great study by the photographer Edward Burdenitsky in his series Manufactured Landscapes, which shows how this very mass production has taken over the world, and how that mass production in all different sectors has changed the landscape, again, for the better or for the worse. Sorry, this isn't cultural artistic context, but actually social context. So, social and ethical aspects of the fashion industry. So the backlash, the protests about sweatshop labour, and how possibly things like cheap fast fashion may have had a major impact on people's lives, and how that has affected the work that they are able to achieve. If we go to economics, looking at the industry, this process of how people manage the fashion industry in order to get the most profits from it. Fashion trend prediction is key to here, how it brings new things into the marketplaces and replaces older things. So as I say, the nuts and bolts, the mechanics of the fashion industry is all about communication, really. As a global, sector, as a global industry, it's spread, all throughout the world, and has been one of the, it's pushed forward communication in many ways, because we have maybe our design happening in a different place to our production having being in a different place to our consumption. And I think this is partly the beauty of the fashion industry and the way it could generate great change. But it's some of the practices that are within that which are causing us problems. So throughout this module, again, it will be looking at the various different stages and of sort of putting inputs into your own management system. It's looking at the end product as well, so the advertising, the marketing and the communication of fashion, quite often through billboards or through fashion magazines. It's also maybe considering, cultural or artistic context of fashion. Fashion as a subject, as an academic subject, has been growing, over the years. It's still quite a young subject in many ways. But I think clothes moving into artistic sort of environments are really helping to strengthen and depthen the academic approach to fashion. So I'm hoping you'll find some very interesting sort of contexts. With something like fashion, it may be that you have to step out of your discipline a little bit. So maybe looking at sociology, psychology, business studies. But there is also, as I say, a growing theory surrounding fashion, which I hope you will be able to, look at. So the module synopsis. So key to this module is that you will learn about key concepts. You're looking at the global fashion industry, and you're going to be encouraged to develop your expertise by looking into, as I say, the concept of fashion, but also the structure and the dynamics of the industry. We're concerned as well with innovation and with new product development and the processes that we can put into fashion. And this, as I say, is through the product lifecycle management, or PLM, process that we will be exploring. There is also opportunity within this module to look at the relationship between design and retail, between within the design process and management. It's also about a critical understanding and an application of the knowledge that you learn. And I say this critical understanding because it moves beyond being descriptive to being about opinions and of about you developing a critical framework in which you can analyse and view things, particularly if we think of things such as design and manufacturing processes. So, what are the ethics within them? What are the environmental implications? And how may we go about changing them? So, it may be as well between comparing and contrasting different processes through case studies. This critical understanding also looks at fashion marketing and communication. So, again, what are the key messages that are being presented through current fashion, and how may they be good or bad? It's also about encouraging you to undertake a literature review. And in regards to this, I will help and I will guide by the way of bibliographies and reading lists. But the onus really is on you. It is your responsibility to source these books and to find them and find ones that you feel will be useful, which will hopefully, as I say, feed into your master project. So the learning strategy. I'm hoping at the end of the module you'll be able to identify a conceptual direction for your major project. You'll be able to select a key theme or a context within the fashion industry to research. You will show development and exploration of concepts and ideas by reviewing the existing literature on your topic, and this will feed into the development of your project proposal. So it's very much about a research process that you will undertake as you respond to the lectures and the material presented. So it's reviewing key issues, concepts and ideas for both this module and also your major project. And lastly, there's this option to actually take a more designerly route to this and responses to the material researched. And this is really sort of more within the realm of practice-led research. So practice-led research is where you undertake research and actually produce designs and design ideas. So this may be an interesting route to take. Myself as a practitioner, this involves, illustrating designs, considering how they may be used, fabrics, and then sort of contextualizing them within photo shoots. The benefit to practice-led research is it starts to give form to thoughts in creating artifacts. This is known as a conceptual practice. There's also dialectic practice, which is about, the process of making and the meaning we may attribute to this process of meaning. There's also something contextual about practice. So it's about thinking in a setting. And this inquiry is often used to bring about social change, and it's about how you may be able to incorporate possibly aspects of practice within your research. And again, this is something we will be looking at. It may make us question what actually constitutes research. On the bottom, we have a very sort of traditional idea about research where we ask a question, we go through very much a linear process. But I think within design, it's recognizing that, and especially fashion research, is how things go around in a circle. And also that actually, the peaks of our research ideas are quite often, have a very sort of messy and sort of, very sort of chaotic underneath. And that's where, you have to sometimes analyze, how you're doing your research. I do quite like there's a writer called Otto von Busch. Well, he's actually also, and he is really about looking at this idea of reforming the operating systems of fashion and the industrial modes of production. And I will show you some of his work later on in the module. But I love this quote because he talks about how hacking into a system, getting into the nitty gritty, is a matter of dedicated and systematic curiosity, of understanding a system, reverse engineering it, finding a suitable place for invention, plugging in and keeping the power on. Hacking is to modify and advance a system because you love it, not because you hate it. And I think that's the state I'm at. I do love the fashion industry for the freedom and for the creativity that it affords. But I'm also horrified by the many practices within fashion that do make me, really, really question how we can operate within this system. So for the lectures and the overall structure of the module, we'll start off with a series of lectures. I will be looking at concepts and contexts of fashion next week. You will then have a talk by Jo Conlon, who is another one of our staff members, who will be looking at the structure and dynamics of the fashion industry, and she will give us an overview of this PLM. We also have a guest lecture coming from Scotland who will give us a talk on affordable luxury, and she will be talking about the internationalisation of Spanish fashion brands, which I think will be very useful for our case studies. I will then sort of conclude this series of lectures by looking at the mechanics of sustainability in fashion. You will then have 5 weeks of looking at digital practice in international fashion management, and this will be with Andrew Taylor and Jo Conlon, and this will require you to be engaging with some software which is used within the industry and which will show you how some of these systems and mechanics are managed. And then finally, we'll conclude by sort of tutorials looking at your project realisation and how you're sort of developing your report. So just a quick sort of touch on this PLM, as I say, because it will form quite a big basis of your report, hopefully. And what you need to start thinking about are the different things that we can put into this PLM. And as it says, it's a process of managing the entire life cycle of a product. And it usually provides a product information background for companies and their extended enterprises. So as I say, I'm hoping that through doing this we'll get a greater understanding of how sort of ideas are communicated. And it is about how things are designed, sourced and retailed sort of globally and I suppose also locally. It uses we use this framework to look at how fashion and textile industries are managed, and at the moment there's great interest in this idea of a circular economy. So this PLM system really works into this circular economy to say actually we need to start inputting into our system the waste that we've been throwing out. So for the assessment, you're asked to produce a report style document, which I've set at 5,000 words or equivalent. Now this equivalent can be design work, it can be visuals, it can be practice. So this is something we can negotiate in terms of how many words you actually write and how full it is and as a report. But the report should really detail your responses to the material presented, and it should be a review of relevant literature and practice pertaining to the mechanics of the fashion industry. Now, at the moment, I see that potentially you will be going down one of two routes. So this could result in something like a management portfolio, which is about a response to the sector and where you position yourself within it. And it's or it could be that it's actually about a design portfolio. So it's about your designerly responses in the form of visuals and design development. So possibly actually designing and producing a collection or marketing, and fashion communication materials. So say this is something that we will negotiate and we will develop as we go along. I will show you some samples, but I think I'm just going to quickly run back to where I think you should start is actually start thinking about a bibliography. Start thinking about the books and the resources that you have around you, we will meet again next week when we look at the concepts of fashion. If you did want to, I have produced a few sort of chapters and a few papers that I will make available to you. This was quite a good one, which looked at my whole journey and my whole enterprise. And again, it's I'll make that available to you. And I just wanted to finish on this quote, which states how the natural sciences are concerned with how things are. Design, on the other hand, is concerned with how things ought to be. And I'm hoping through this module that we'll all learn ways in which we can use design to have a better way of living in it. Thank you.